Escape from Tarkov PVE has experienced some recent changes to the AI, and today's video is going to go over some of the things that maybe you will have noticed within the game but didn't know exactly why they were the case. And of course we'll get into all of the nitty-gritties of what actually happened during the latest patch. When the hardcore wipe on PvP happened, some changes for PvE also happened at the same time. They are not linked to one another, and to clarify, you do not have to reset your PvE account at all at the moment to be able to unlock anything that was released with the hardcore wipe on PvP. Nothing is requiring a reset of your account. That is only occurring at 1.0 full version release of Escape from Tarkov. So to clear that up, that is kind of some of the caveats. Now, the actual changes which happened during this latest patch 0.16.8, we actually saw a readjustment to the PMC bot spawns, which is the biggest thing that I've seen throughout the game at the moment. And I think whilst there are some benefits, there are also some pretty annoying drawbacks to this system that has now been implemented for the AI, and I wanted to cover those. So today's video is covering that because the PMC bot spawn system has now changed, the AI PMCs will no longer spawn immediately at points of interest. So previously, if you didn't already know, PMCs would basically spawn at set locations on a map that were interesting. You know, for example, if you were playing customs, they would spawn within the dorms area, they would spawn within the stronghold area, they would spawn at old gas or new gas, and essentially that is where they would spawn. Now what's happened is they've distributed where the AI PMCs will actually spawn to essentially spawn at remote spawn points. So this is like your typical PvP spawn points that you would see within the game already. And so this change is actually a good change in my opinion, but there are a few things left to kind of, I guess, feel like it's an actual good change. And so the main thing is that now you can see PMCs actually spawning at those PMC spawn locations. So where you would typically spawn at PMCs, AI can actually spawn in those locations as well, which means if you're playing something like Factory, they'll spawn in the gate. So gate 3, gate 1, all of these sorts of places. They can spawn in the underground, and they will now travel to loot POI, so points of interest, which means that they will go from a spawn point to a point of interest, and then they will move from that point of interest after a set period of time to an extract. And so that means that you get some more interesting kind of interactions from AI PMCs that you typically wouldn't find within the game previously, which is a really good thing. Now you're meeting them at random places. Sometimes they can be in weird locations. It's not always that typical, like, if I go this route I will never meet PMCs. Now it's a case of they could have spawned there and you could potentially meet them in random locations at various points along the map. Previously, essentially, what you would only find is that PMCs would be in weirder locations when they were going to extract, which would often take a lot longer into the raid, and so you wouldn't really meet them in those locations. Now, because of the fact that, you know, maybe you spend a bit of time doing one task in a certain location, that you would then move to a different location and suddenly you're kind of fighting PMCs where you wouldn't have seen them in a previous raid where maybe you didn't take as long doing a certain task. So it means that you get a better kind of, they're going to travel to the POI, but because maybe you spend 7 minutes in this raid, they actually come into contact with you when they're moving to the POI, whereas in 4 minutes, if you were doing something, maybe you wouldn't even come into contact them and they'll be further behind in that line from where they'll go from their spawn to the POI. So you can get different kinds of engagements that you typically wouldn't get and would only really be the exact same sorts of engagements that you would find at the POI location itself. So this is one of the best changes about it, is that now you've got a bit more randomization with the fights that you're taking. They're not necessarily always in the same spot, and so that in itself makes it feel more realistic, makes it feel more kind of engaging, the actual gameplay wise. And whilst this is a good change and is definitely noticeable within the games, especially if you play something like Factory, you will see it instantly. Like, you will genuinely see where the PMCs are spawning. You can see that they've changed the spawn location of them. They're not just spawning, you know, in set points anymore, and that you have to just basically look for those set points within the game. And once you've played enough, you'll know exactly where they spawn. Now, obviously, you can take advantage of that, because if you know where the PMC spawn locations are, you can focus on going there, which I've done on Factory by just basically going towards them and knowing where the factory spawns for PMCs are. If you've played a lot of PvP, you know that, and you'll get used to it on PvE. If this is your first playthrough, you've never played Tarkov really before, you'll kind of get the gist of where PMCs will spawn on a much smaller map. The issue with this update, and why it isn't as good as what I was hoping, is that because they're now spawning at PMC spawn locations, what you'll find is that some of your raids feel entirely dead on the larger maps. Factory, not so much of an issue, because of course they're still spawning in the map. The map is really small anyway, so you're always coming into contact with them at some point. However, what you can find is you can spend 20 minutes in a raid now without ever coming into contact with people, even when you go to the points of interest, which can make doing some of those tasks that are more difficult, you know, ones where it requires you to take out PMCs at set points on a map, for example, you know, taking out PMCs at Stronghold on customs, for example, for a task. That is much more difficult because they don't necessarily actually go there at the time that you might go there. And so you're having to wait for them to arrive to then get the task done. And so the issue is that maybe they don't even go there because maybe they didn't even spawn at the PMC spawn location that will travel to the Stronghold. So maybe they go to the dorms, and so you actually end up with no one even going to the location that you need to get your task done. And so that is the core issue, is that because there are a decent amount of spawns within the game, and I think it does fluctuate from map to map and from raid to raid, that sometimes you find if you run a factory raid that you can meet only one PMC and that is it. There's no other PMCs for some reason. And I've searched the entire area. Sometimes you never see a PMC on factory, which is very strange. It's like as if there are like an RNG on how many PMCs will actually spawn on a map. Sometimes you get lucky and there's like 10. Some raids feel actually chock-a-block with people, and you'll come into a factory raid and there will be, you know, 3 groups of 4 people and of course yourself, and you're just constantly farming these PMCs. Some raids you go in, there's 1 PMC. This is obviously accentuated on a map like, for example, Woods, where maybe only like 2 of the spawn points actually have PMC spawn at them, and you know, you're never going to actually find them on the map. The map is just so big that the PMCs never come into contact with you. Or, you know, maybe you do come into contact with them, but that is the only action you really have. Obviously, you've got Partisan and the bosses that can spawn, but, you know, they're not always guaranteed. And so this is probably one of the most annoying issues that I have found when I'm running with the latest update to Escape from Tarkov's PvE mode, is that it's the disparity between sometimes the raids feel stacked and you do actually feel engaged. There's lots of PMCs to actually fight, as well as scavs. Sometimes the scavs amounts don't seem to really ever be anywhere near what you need to complete certain tasks. For example, I was playing Woods on the hardcore account when I was just trying to grind through some of the tasks, and you have to take out like 15 scavs on Woods for one of the tasks. And it genuinely took me like 3 raids to take out like 8 scavs. And I wasn't like, you know, of course, maybe I could have got 12 or 13 in those 3 raids if I was specifically just going around all of the potential spots where scavs could spawn. But generally, like, even if you play PvP, you can often find 5, 6, 7, 8 scavs in one singular raid that you can take out personally. And of course, there's like 10 people within the raid who are also doing the exact same thing. The amount of scavs just seem to be very low at the moment on PvE, that you just don't really see them that often. And then equally, some raids you'll see like 10 of them, and suddenly it's like an absolute blitz of both like 10 scavs, and then you're seeing like 3 sets of PMCs, like 3 groups of PMCs. It just seems very much weird in terms of like how consistent the spawns and the amounts of players and AI that are actually in your game, which of course is really annoying if you're trying to do certain tasks, and it just takes that immersion away from the game when you've literally not seen anything, and you may have seen 2 scavs in a 30-minute raid where you've literally ran around all of the key points of interest and there's literally nothing there. Especially if there's no bosses or anything that you can even just go and try and get some action with when they don't have the 100% boss spawn on the certain map that you might be playing. It kind of takes away from it. It just feels like you are simply running around trying to pick up the minuscule amounts of scraps in the game. And whilst this might be better for newer players, you know, there's less chance that you're coming into contact with people. It's also not teaching you how to play. It's not actually giving you that experience because you're not seeing that many PMCs, or you're not seeing that many scavs or whatever in the game itself. So you're not learning as quickly as to how to get better at the game, which, you know, for the mode, it's supposedly a kind of mode where you can kind of learn Tarkov and that sort of thing. And whilst you can learn the maps a little bit easier on PVE and learn out where kind of the key locations are, where you can go and complete tasks and go through the task lines, it does feel a little bit lackluster in that department. But does that actually mean that the AI changes that they've done are bad? No, I do not think that these are bad changes. I think that these are great changes in terms of what the intention was, but because of the inconsistent spawns of both PMC, scavs, and the AI in general within the raids, it makes it feel like those some raids you just don't see anyone, some you get really good enjoyment, more so than you did previously, but they're not enough. It's not like every raid, you don't feel like every raid is as engaging as it potentially could be and exciting and fun as it could be. So my suggestion would be to at least up the spawns or maintain the consistency of those spawns so that you always have at least a decent amount of AI PMCs, or that they are always in locations that aren't like off to one map. Like if 3 sets of PMCs all spawn in like one corner of the map and like none in any other area of the map, it makes it so that only like a quarter of the map will ever have action, and if you don't need to go there, you haven't got anything. So maybe it's because the distribution of the spawns isn't quite as good as it could be, and whilst it's not as noticeable on maps like Factory, the larger maps definitely are affected. So hopefully they can make a more consistent amount of AI spawn in the maps, but so far, yeah, it definitely feels a little bit lackluster in terms of the overall fun and engagement that it could potentially be with this update. So that is something I wanted to touch on in the video, and kind of why I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well, because I am just a singular player. I probably play Tarkov way too much. Maybe I'm getting the wrong take. Maybe you guys have a completely different experience recently with this, but it definitely feels like there are some empty raids, and then there are some absolutely cracked raids out there that are a ton of fun. So yeah, that definitely is something that has been accentuated. It did happen previously, but it feels even worse now, and even better now when you get the differences in those spawns. Of course, they also then changed the friendly foe identification system for PMC bots to distribute the availability of spawn points and check them for enemies. So essentially, AI will now have a better, like basically they introduced a patch which would require PMCs to, you know, have a friendly / foe identification. So they would basically give them that they are hostile to everyone, so they're mega aggressive, they will just attack anything. They also had a system where they were friendly unless pointed their weapon at them, for example. There's also one that they are just purely friendly and will only retaliate if you fire at them. This seems to be a thing with regards to you as a player. Sometimes they're more passive, sometimes they don't aggressively attack you, sometimes they are mega aggressive and will literally charge at you, and maybe that's this sort of thing that they've tried to add in. And they've also fixed several bugs where regular bots and PMC bots would not be hostile towards each other, so they wouldn't even fight, but now they've actually done that, so scavs and PMCs will fight each other more now. They did previously, but it's basically like solved a lot of the issues that were happening sometimes with the PMCs and the scavs not fighting, so you're probably hearing a lot more gunfire within maps like things like Interchange, you know, where you can often pinpoint where PMCs and scavs are going to be fighting each other, PMCs and bosses and that sort of thing, as well as the fact that PMC bots will try to avoid boss areas as well, but they still may engage in a fight with them. So it's not 100% that they won't fight the boss, but they've done this in order to stop things like, for example, where the PMC bots would travel to Sturman, take him out before you can even get close to being able to even fight or see Sturman. And sometimes you go into a raid, and because the spawn chance of him is like 30% generally, you spend 3 raids going there, and then the one that he actually spawns in, the AI have already taken him out before you could even get remotely close to getting to Sturman himself. So that is kind of what they've attempted to do. I've not really found any issues with that. Typically, if the boss spawns now, he does actually spawn and you can get there before the PMCs. Sometimes you'll also find that the PMCs come in whilst you're fighting the bosses. So that has also happened for me. But generally a good change. I think a lot of people will enjoy that one. But equally, I think that there does need to still be the fact that PMCs will actually fight the boss at the same time. So, you know, you can have those weird interactions where maybe you're fighting the boss and suddenly a PMC just comes in to kind of gank you and come in and try and flank you whilst you're trying to deal with the boss, and you can have those fun interactions as well. So that is definitely a very positive change. Overall, I think it's a positive change, and I don't want to be a naysayer about PvE, AI and stuff like that, but I definitely think there is still room to kind of get that completely right, consistent across the board, so that you don't have these raids which feel completely empty. I have had quite a few of those, and it just feels boring. But then you get like that little trickle of raids where it's just like amazing and everyone seems to be fighting, there's lots of spawns and everything like that, and it feels really engaging. But it's not all of the time, and that is the frustrating thing, because you know how good it can be, but it isn't all of the time. So maybe there's something that BSG could give us in terms of detail to make it so that that is more consistent, or that they can give us a reason why that might be the case in those raids. Is it because the PMCs have spawned in a miles off location and all of them for some reason have spawned at the same location, and so you never actually get to see them? Or is it that they simply are not even spawning at all, and there's only like one group of PMCs in the entire map, which in bigger maps, obviously you can understand why you may not even get close to those, especially if you're doing certain places on the map. But that is kind of the video today. I'm not going to drag it on any further. I really want to take this moment though to thank all of the supporters of the channel. There has been a ton of support recently. Of course, I've seen loads of super chats, and of course, a really big thank you to all of the channel members that have actually joined the channel as well. It really does mean a lot, and it allows me to actually do these sorts of videos. That sort of support actually literally puts food on my table and pays my rent or mortgage, and yeah, I really do appreciate that. So thank you very much to everyone that has been supporting me in that way, and of course just watching the videos as well is a big support. So thank you very much. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and hopefully I get to see some of your comments. It's always interesting to read them and reply to some. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in there, even if they're not related to the video. I'm happy to answer them, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.